My hands were shaking as I pulled up to the curb. Not from the cold, even though it was a gray November morning, and not from nerves about the sale closing. No, my hands were shaking because through the front window of my father's house, my house, the house I had inherited fair and square, I could see lights on inside, a lamp I didn't recognize glowing in the living room, a jacket I had never seen hanging on the coat rack by the door, and through the thin curtain my mother had sewn by hand 30 years ago, the unmistakable silhouette of two people moving around like they lived there. Because apparently, to them, they did. I sat in my car for a moment and pressed my fingertips against the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing down. The real estate agent was pulling up right behind me. The buyers? A young couple who had fallen in love with the property the first time they walked through it, who had already given notice at their apartment, who had driven 40 minutes this morning full of excitement, were parking right behind her. And I had to get out of this car, walk up to that front door, and figure out what in the world my brother thought he was doing. Let me go back to the beginning, because nothing about that morning makes sense unless you understand what the years before it looked like. My father was a quiet man, steady. He worked in logistics for most of his adult life, got up at 5 in the morning without fail, never complained about much, and put almost everything he had into that house. He bought it the year before I was born. 3 bedrooms, a small yard in the back, a garage that he used more for woodworking than for cars. It wasn't fancy, but he took care of it the way he took care of everything he loved. Methodically, patiently, without expecting anyone to notice. My brother and I grew up in that house. We are 4 years apart, him older, and we had a perfectly ordinary sibling relationship for most of our childhood. Bickering, then forgetting about it, then bickering again. The real divergence came later. I finished college, got a job in healthcare administration, built something small but stable. My brother never quite found his footing. He jumped from job to job in his late 20s, always with a reason that made sense on the surface, but somehow always ended with someone else being at fault. A bad boss, the company moving, his coworker undermining him. There was always a story. Our mother, for reasons I have spent years trying not to be bitter about, handled this by quietly lowering her expectations for him and raising them for me. Which sounds neutral but wasn't. It meant that when things went wrong in his life, she called me. It meant that when he needed money for a deposit on an apartment 6 years ago, she sat at our kitchen table and looked at me until I wrote the check. He paid back about 1/3 of it before deciding we were even. I never brought it up again because I had learned by then that bringing things up with my family only resulted in me being told I was holding grudges. My father was different. He saw it. He never said much, but he saw it. And in the last year of his life, when his health started declining and he was spending more time thinking about what would come after, he was careful. He updated his will with an attorney. He sat down with me, just the two of us, and told me directly that he was leaving the house to me. Not because he loved me more, he said, but because he had watched me work for things, and he trusted me to make a good decision with it. He also told me that he had already spoken to my brother about this, that my brother had nodded, said he understood, and that seemed to be the end of it. My father passed away 14 months ago. The grief was enormous and quiet, the kind that doesn't announce itself dramatically but just sits on your chest every morning when you wake up. I handled the estate, worked with the attorney, got through all of it. The house transferred to me legally and cleanly. My brother said very little during that period. He came to the funeral, helped carry the casket, and then more or less disappeared back into his own life. I gave myself a year before making any decisions about the house. I kept paying the utilities, kept up with the basic maintenance, went by every few weeks just to check on things. And then I decided to sell. Not because I wanted to let it go, it gutted me honestly, but because I had my own rent, my own bills, and keeping an empty house in another part of the city was not something I could sustain indefinitely. I found a real estate agent, listed it in September, and by mid-October I had an offer I was happy with. The closing was set for the second week of November. I told my mother about the sale. She went quiet on the phone and then said she thought it was a shame to let it go out of the family. I still remember the casual shrug. I still remember the casual shrug. I still remember the casual shrug, as she handed politely, and I didn't think much more about it. I did not tell my brother. That was not an oversight. That was a choice. Because Every time I had included him in anything related to the estate, there had been a comment, a suggestion, an implication that maybe things hadn't been divided fairly. I didn't have the energy for it. The sale was happening regardless of his opinion, so I didn't see the point in opening the door. Now, standing on the sidewalk with my real estate agent walking toward me and the buyers getting out of their car behind her, I understood the shape of my mistake. Not telling him had not protected me from this. It had just meant I didn't see it coming. I asked the real estate agent to give me 2 minutes. I could see from her face that she already sensed something was off. She nodded and turned back toward the buyers, gesturing at the yard, saying something about the mature oak tree that the buyers had commented on twice during the showing. She was good at her job. She bought me the time I needed. I walked up the front path and knocked on my own front door. There was a pause, then footsteps. Then the door opened and my brother was standing there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding a coffee mug, looking at me like I was the one who had shown up uninvited. I asked him what he was doing there. He said he was staying there for a bit while he sorted some things out. I told him that wasn't possible, that I had a real estate agent standing in my driveway and buyers who had driven 40 minutes to do a final walkthrough before the closing paperwork went through. He looked past me at the driveway. His expression shifted, not to guilt, not to embarrassment, but to something more like irritation. Like I was the one creating a problem. He said, and I want to get this exactly right because I have replayed it many times, that our mother had told him I wasn't selling for a while, that there was plenty of time and that it was fine for him to stay there temporarily while his apartment situation worked itself out. I still were for a moment genuinely speechless. I asked him when exactly our mother had told him that. He said a few weeks ago. I asked him when he had moved in. He said about 10 days ago. I looked behind him into the house. There was a duffel bag on the couch, a pair of boots by the stairs, a phone charger plugged into the outlet in the hallway that my father had used for the lamp that had been there for 20 years. The lamp was gone. I have no idea where the lamp went. His girlfriend appeared at the top of the stairs. She was younger than him, maybe mid-20s, and she looked genuinely surprised to see me, which told me she had not been given an accurate picture of the situation. She said hello carefully. I said hello back. I told my brother he needed to leave today. I told him that the sale was not on hold, that there was no while, that I had buyers standing in my driveway right now who had a signed offer and a closing date. He said that seemed sudden. I told him it was not sudden. It was a process that had been underway for 2 months. He said nobody had told him. I told him that the house was mine to sell and I was not required to run my timeline by him. Then he said it. The thing that I suppose he had been building toward, the thing that I think he had been sitting with for 14 months, waiting for the right moment. He looked at me and said that our father would have wanted him to have the house, that as the firstborn son it didn't make sense that it went to me. That our father wasn't thinking clearly in his last year, and the will didn't reflect what he actually would have wanted. I felt something go very still inside me. I told him that Dad had met with his attorney twice, that he had been assessed, that his capacity had been confirmed, that the will was executed properly and had held up through probate without challenge. I also told him that Dad had spoken to him directly about this decision, which he knew because he had been in that conversation. He looked away. Just for a second. But I saw it. His girlfriend was very still at the top of the stairs. I told him I was going to go speak to my real estate agent and the buyers and ask them to wait a few minutes. I told him that when I came back, I expected him to start gathering his things. He said he wasn't sure that was fair and that maybe we should call our mother. I told him he was welcome to call whoever he wanted, but that when I came back inside, I would be calling the non-emergency police line to request an officer assist with a trespass situation if needed, because that was exactly what this was. And I would like to not have to do that in front of the people who were buying this house. I turned around, walked back down the front path, and spent approximately 4 minutes talking to the real estate agent and the buyers, apologizing for the delay, explaining there was a family matter I needed to handle quickly, and asking if they would be comfortable waiting at the coffee shop 2 blocks away for up to an hour while I sorted it out. The buyers exchanged a glance. The wife. She was the one who had cried a little during the first showing. In the backyard, she said it reminded her of her grandmother's house. She squeezed my arm and said, "Take whatever time you need, we're not going anywhere." That nearly undid me, honestly. I waited until their car was out of sight, then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I told her what was happening. I told her I was standing outside Dad's house with buyers who had a signed offer and a closing date, and that her son had been living inside for 10 days on the basis of something she had apparently told him. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she hadn't thought I was selling so soon, that she had thought I might hold on to it for a while, that she had mentioned to my brother that I didn't seem ready to let it go. I asked her if she had told him he could stay there. She said she had mentioned that it was sitting empty and it seemed like a waste. I told her that it being empty was my choice to make, that I had been paying the utilities on an empty house for over a year and that this was not an invitation for anyone to move in without my permission. She said that seemed cold. That family should be able to rely on each other. I asked her if family relying on each other included one family member entering someone else's property with a spare key. And I need to stop here and explain that my mother had a spare key to the house from when my father was still alive and she would check on him sometimes. And I had not taken it back after he passed, which was, I now understood, an oversight I would not be making twice. And she said that it wasn't breaking in, it was family. I told her it was trespassing, that it didn't matter if it was family, that you cannot enter someone's property and inhabit it without the owner's permission and that this was not a gray area. She said I was being very legal about everything. I told her I was being very legal about everything because I was standing outside my own house, watching my sale fall apart. She asked if I really needed to do this today. She asked if there was any way to postpone the closing and give my brother a little time to find something. I told her that postponing the closing was not something I could do unilaterally, that the buyers had given notice on their apartment and that I was not going to blow up a contract that I had worked for 2 months to get because my brother had decided to squat in my house. She said she didn't think squatting was the right word. I told her I had to go. I went back inside. My brother was sitting on the couch. He had not moved. He had not started gathering anything. His girlfriend was now sitting next to him, and she had her arms crossed in a way that looked less like she was taking his side and more like she was uncomfortable and didn't know what else to do with her hands. I told him I had spoken to our mother. He said he knew because she had just texted him. I told him that regardless of what she had said, the situation was not changing. The house was going to be walked through today. The closing was happening as scheduled, and he needed to get his things and go. He said he didn't have anywhere to go on this kind of notice. I told him that I understood that was a difficult position, but that it was a position he had put himself in without consulting me, and I wasn't able to make it my problem at the expense of a legal contract. He said I was being selfish. I want to be very honest about what I felt in that moment. Not rage, exactly. Something quieter and more tired than rage. Because I had heard some version of that word my whole life, every time I held a boundary, every time I didn't give him what he wanted, every time I didn't decision based on what I had actually built and earned. I was 28 when I stopped letting it move me. I was 31 now. I took out my phone. I called the non-emergency line. I explained the situation clearly and calmly. I gave the address. I said that I was the legal owner of the property and that I had family members inside who were there without my permission and were refusing to leave voluntarily, and I would like an officer to come assist. They said someone would be there within about 30 minutes. His girlfriend looked at him. It was a very particular look, the kind where you can see someone doing a quiet recalculation. She asked him, quietly, whether he had told her the full story about this house. He said yes, of course he had. She said, and I thought this showed a lot of clarity for someone sitting in the middle of a very uncomfortable situation, that she wanted to understand. The owner had just called the police. The house was apparently already sold, and he had moved them in here 10 days ago. She asked if he had known about the sale before they moved in. He said it was complicated. She said she'd like him to uncomplicate it. I stepped into the kitchen to give them privacy, but I want to be honest that the kitchen was not far away and the house is small and I could hear most of it. He told her that his sister, me, had been treating him like he didn't matter since their father died. That the will wasn't fair and everyone in the family knew it. That he had just needed some time to figure things out and this house was sitting empty anyway. She asked if I knew they were here. He said not exactly. She asked what not exactly meant. He said he had figured I'd be fine with it if it was just temporary. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she had left her apartment for this, that she had canceled her lease, and that he had brought her to a house that he did not own without telling the owner, and now the police were on their way. He said she was overreacting. She did not respond to that. The officer arrived in about 25 minutes. She was professional and straightforward. She asked me to walk her through the situation, which I did. I showed her the property records on my phone. I had pulled them up the moment I sat back down in my car after calling, because I wanted to be ready. I showed her the sale agreement. She looked at both for about 90 seconds, asked my brother and his girlfriend a few questions, and then told my brother, very plainly, that he would need to take whatever he needed for the night and vacate the property, that the owner had the right to have them removed, and that if he didn't leave voluntarily, she would have to take the matter further. He looked at me one more time. I don't know exactly what he was looking for, maybe for me to soften, to say, all right, let's figure this out. Take a few more days. Maybe that's what he expected because it was what he was used to. I didn't say anything. He picked up his duffel bag. His girlfriend picked up her own bag from upstairs. I hadn't even known she had a separate bag up there, and she was very quiet the whole time. She looked at me once on her way out and she said she was sorry. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. My brother walked past me without speaking. The officer waited until they were in the car and the car had pulled away from the curb. She told me I should get my locks changed today if possible. I told her I already had a locksmith coming at noon. I had scheduled it 3 days ago because I had learned from this family a long time ago that preparation was the only defense that actually worked. She nodded and said good luck with the closing. I called my real estate agent. I told her we were clear. She called the buyers. They were back at the house within 15 minutes. The wife came in and walked slowly through each room the way she had during the showing, running her hand along the door frames, pausing in the room that had been my father's. She told me she was going to take good care of it. I had promised myself I wasn't going to cry in front of anyone that day. I didn't quite make it. The closing happened on schedule. Every piece of paperwork went through without issue. My father's attorney, who had handled the estate and was aware of my brother's comments over the previous year about potentially contesting the will, sent me a brief email that afternoon that said simply, "Congratulations, your father would be pleased." I held that email on my phone for a long time. My mother called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was about 4 minutes long and covered a lot of ground. That I had embarrassed the family, that involving the police was excessive, that my father would not have wanted this, that my brother was struggling and I had always had it easier, that I needed to think about what kind of person I was becoming. I listened to all of it once. Then I deleted it. I called her back the next morning. I told her, as calmly as I could, that I loved her and that I was not interested in having a relationship defined by me managing the consequences of my brother's choices, that I would not be apologizing for what happened, that if she wanted to talk about something else, I was available, but I was not going to discuss the house or the sale or my brother's living situation. I told her I was going to hang up now, and I hoped she had a good day. She started to say something else. I hung up. My brother did not contact me directly for several weeks. When he finally did, it was a text message that was 1 sentence long. It said, "You really didn't have to call the police." I thought about it for a moment. I thought about what I might have said a few years ago. Something conciliatory, something that left the door open, something that prioritized his comfort over the truth. I thought about the apartment deposit I had written him when I was 25. I thought about the lamp that used to be in my father's living room that I still haven't been able to account for. I wrote back 2 words, "Yes, I did." He didn't respond after that. I don't know where he and his girlfriend ended up. I heard through my aunt, who is my mother's sister and has always been the most sensible person in the family, that the girlfriend moved back to her previous city, that the 2 of them broke up shortly after. My aunt said, without elaborating, that the girlfriend had apparently had a long conversation with her own family after that morning and come to some conclusions. I don't have any bad feelings about her. I genuinely hope she lands somewhere good. The money from the sale went into an account I opened specifically for it. I am not ready to decide what to do with it yet. Some of it will eventually go toward a down payment on something of my own. Some of it might go toward something that honors what my father spent his life building. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I trust that I'll figure it out. He trusted me to make a good decision. I intend to. The thing that stays with me isn't the confrontation. It isn't the police officer or the paperwork or even my mother's voicemail. The thing that stays with me is the moment I turned around and walked back down that front path the first time, after telling my brother I was going to speak to the buyers, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, completely certain about what I was doing. No second guessing. No internal negotiation. No voice in the back of my head asking whether I was being too harsh, too cold, too legal, as my mother would say. I had spent years in this family treating my own clarity like something to be apologized for. Like knowing what I wanted and being willing to act on it was a character flaw I needed to soften constantly so that everyone around me could stay comfortable. On that front path, on that gray November morning, with the oak tree dropping the last of its leaves into the yard my father had mowed every week for 30 years, I stopped apologizing for it. I don't know what my brother thinks of me now. I don't spend very much time wondering. What I know is that my father sat down with me in his last year, looked me in the eye, and told me he trusted me. That is the version of my family I carry with me. That is the one I intend to deserve.